Paul, what a wacky Monday night game. What did you think?
I thought it was awesome, Peter. I really enjoyed it. And I think all of us, no matter who we pull for, we appreciate something that just looks a lot different than we're used to. So last night's game didn't have the excitement in the big play potential that maybe some of us are attracted to that we want to see in a primetime game. But if you're into a meaningful game that has different elements than you're used to seeing, like I wish that game was 8 quarters last night. And I'm normally attracted to great quarterback play, but I just love the strategy and how unique that game was and the way it played out. I thought it was wonderful.
I would agree. I kept looking at the clock, especially in the first half, until like the last 2 minutes of the first half. I said, they're going to play this half in about an hour and 5 minutes, which is unheard of. And it just never, ever happens. But I was so fascinated by each coach. And look, I was reminded of a couple of things watching this game, Paul. One was, do you remember in the Super Bowl, the New England-Seattle Super Bowl, when with about 70 seconds to go, the Patriots had, basically had or maybe like a minute and a half to go. The Seahawks were down right at the goal line, and they had to make a decision on what to call. And Belichick would not call a timeout. And he just kept watching the field. And he was, here he was. He was just like, well, it looked like on the sidelines, it was a preseason game in August. It just, totally, totally cool. Whereas on the other sideline, you looked over at Seattle as, what are we doing? What do you want to do here? Do we want to take a timeout? Why aren't they taking a timeout? All this stuff. And so that's what it reminded me of last night. Other than a couple of times when Belichick got really ticked off at the officials, he was as cool as a cucumber coaching this game. That was one thing. And the second thing I was reminded of, Paul, a long time ago, 17 years ago, Sports Illustrated sent me to do sort of at the time, because Belichick wasn't Belichick, the 6-time Super Bowl winning coach or whatever it is. And so he hadn't, the legend hadn't gone nuts. It was after a second Super Bowl. And I get assigned by Sports Illustrated to write the definitive Belichick profile. And I tell him I'm doing it, and I go up and visit him, and I talk to him and everything. And I said, hey, can I go over to your house and see your football library? Because reading was always big to Bill. And he said, a little uncomfortable with that. So I was up there for a couple of days, and just before I was going to leave, he just said to me, he said, hey, get in your car and follow me. And I was hoping that he had changed his mind and he was going to let me go. So we did. I went over to his house, walked in, and in sort of a brightly lit library kind of office, with beautiful bookshelves. He had all of his football collection, which he has now given to the Naval Academy. And if you want to see his football library, you can. You could just walk in and take a look at all the volumes at the Naval Academy. It's open. You can actually go do this. But that day, I remember looking at all the books, the old books by Grantland Rice and about Newt Rockne and the origins of football and all this, going up through time to, biographies of all famous players. There was one book in that bookshelf that I kept thinking to myself, why is this here? It was called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And I said, Bill, The Art of War, what can you learn about football from that? And he sort of shrugged and he said, don't go to war when the ground is muddy. And at the time, I basically dismissed it. He was just chuckling about it. But I really thought about it last night for this reason. Bill Belichick understands that what happens in football sometimes is dictated by things outside of your control. And in an adverse weather game, in a horrible weather game, no one calls you before the game and says, oh, by the way, the weather is horrendous. So A, you don't have to play today. We're going to postpone the game. Or B, we'll forgive you if you take a mulligan and you lose this game. Don't worry about it. Counts the same as all the other games. Shouldn't you figure out the best way to do it? So last night in this game, don't go to war when the ground is muddy. I kept thinking, Bill Belichick has thought about every little plan in this game. And even if Damian Harris hadn't run for that long touchdown, I don't think he would have played the game much differently at all, because he would have said, I like my field goal kicker a lot, and I am going to just simply not play. I'm going to play to not make mistakes. And that's exactly what he did. Neither team, it was weird. Neither team was, handing the ball to the other team very much. It wasn't that sloppy a game. It just was a strange game. But I just think Belichick handled the weather in that game about as well as a coach could.
I think it's interesting, Peter, that you bring up the fact, or you kind of go back anecdotally to that Super Bowl in Phoenix against the Seahawks at the end. And what you're really talking about there is details and the attention to details as it pertained to what mattered in the game. Let's go back the last 20 years and pick out any game you'd like, whether it's that Super Bowl win, whether it's what happened last night, no matter who's at quarterback. How many times has Bill Belichick been coaching the Patriots and they won the game, and you look back and you say, well, that was an otherwise extremely even game. It came down to one or two details, and you can pick out the details that mattered the most. And last night, what made it fun was the extreme wind and how each team had to change and adapt to it. But once you get past that spectacle part of it and get down to the details that mattered for the Patriots this time, you're talking about a made field goal and a missed field goal. You can stop right there. I mean, that's the difference in the game right there. If you want to add another layer to it, a converted 2-point conversion. That's a minute detail that went the Patriots' way as well. And if you want to go +1, the Patriots defensive backs, I think, made 3 plays on the ball, 3 terrific plays on the ball on key 3rd and 4th downs in the second half. That's it. Talk about the wins, talk about Mac Jones and Josh Allen. Those 3 little details that the Patriots came through on last night, that's why they won. And it's just one more volume to that giant book. You brought up all of Bill's books, but one more volume, one more chapter to this. We had a couple more details sorted out than you did, and that's why we won the close game.
So, Paul, I know there's one thing I want to ask you as someone, you have been in the arena. You were a Big Ten quarterback at Iowa. And I wonder, for people who just watching that game on television last night, and I was thinking of, here's Mac Jones. He's a kid from Jacksonville. He played at Alabama. There's a good chance never in his life has he played in an environment like last night. I mean, those are probably the harshest conditions he ever played in. Take me into the mind of a quarterback playing in a game like that, and look back at your past and tell me if you ever played in a game that was absolutely horrendous conditions. How'd you do? How'd you cope?
Well, playing in the Big Ten, I mean, once we got to November, and a lot of times before that, you're going to have the cold, wet, windy game. So I'm used to playing in the 15 to 20 mile per hour wind range. And let's start there. The wind is really the only problem for a quarterback. You can kind of deal with the wet ball. Cold isn't that big of a deal. Snow doesn't bother you at all. But once that wind gets above 15 miles per hour, your ball is going to be affected. And once you get above 20, and I guess it was whipping up around 40 or 50 last night, it is nearly impossible to make the ball go where you want it to go. We had a number of games I can remember at Iowa State, at Northwestern, where we eliminated the toss sweep because it was that windy. Wow. And we just had to turn and hand it off. We won games where I think I was 6 for 8 at Iowa State one year because it was so windy we couldn't throw. But thinking about the wind, it made me so impressed with Josh Allen last night, Peter, because we hear about arm strength a lot. We'll talk
Yeah.
about it a lot in March and April about the draft. And most of the time, it's overrated. It wasn't last night. And the nuance that's added to that is being a spiral thrower matters. Most of the time, it's just aesthetic. It's like, oh, that's a great ball.
Yeah.
NFL films can zoom in on it and it looks so
But
pretty.
last night, you're right. It really matters.
It really matters. When you can get that many RPMs on the ball and it stays tight in that spiral, your chances of your decision of like, I want the ball to go there. If you got a lot of RPMs, it's a tight spiral, there's a fighting chance you can get it there. If you're not a spiral thrower, if you're not a thrower that gets the ball to spin a lot, you have very little chance of getting the ball from point A to point B. And even though they lost last night, Josh Allen's command of the ball and what he could do with it in that wind, to me, being a quarterback nerd, was one of the most impressive parts of that game last night.
Okay, but I'll make one nitpick on your point, and I agree. I was impressed. Josh Allen often looked like there was no wind at all out there. He's got a howitzer. He's really, really an impressive player. But I will tell you this. The last throw he made in the game, where he has basically two receivers to the left. I think he's got Cole Beasley in the slot and he's got Davis outside, right? And he basically, either maybe it was a lack of communication or he underthrew the ball. I couldn't really tell whether, who exactly he meant that ball to. It looked like it was to Davis on a deep in cut, okay, who was, I bet, 4 yards deep in the end zone. This is from the New England 18, on 4th and 14. But I remember thinking to myself, and the Patriots kid, Bryant, knocked it away. And I remember thinking to myself, I bet he wishes he had that back because he thought he put enough on it, but the wind must have knocked it down. Either that or, and I doubt this, but Cole Beasley was supposed to turn out instead of turning in. And I don't know. You saw the play. What do you think happened?
Yeah. I think Cole Beasley went the right way. I think it was straight man coverage, which is what you want down there. There was no middle of the field safety help, at least not by call. And Cole was running the more shallow crossing route. And then behind him, Davis ran the deeper in route. I think that was the combination they called on. I thought he had Beasley right away. I thought that might have been the better call. I think you're right on. I think the wind held that ball up a little bit. What impressed me most on that play, the kid, and I want to make sure I get his name right, Miles Bryant. He was covering Cole Beasley, and normally when you're covering someone straight man for man, you're just on that person. And if the ball goes somewhere else, hey, it went somewhere else. I got my man covered, and he had the wherewithal to come off of his man and bat it down. I think it would have been batted down anyway, but that was just such an instinctual play. I thought Louis Riddick did a nice job last night of breaking it down in the moment right after and pointing out how great his instincts were. But we talk about the details of Bill Belichick teams and the DBs. That was a high-level instinctual play that really stood out.
Paul, let's wrap our conversation about this game with what this game means right now, okay? So I'll give you my 3 points, and I want to hear whatever you think the meaning of this is. First meaning, Patriots now have taken hold of the AFC East, which obviously is a surprise. I don't think anybody saw this coming at the start of the year, but they have taken hold now of the AFC East. They right now have a 1.5 lead over Buffalo, which is in essence a 2-game lead because they've got the tiebreaker advantage. The other thing that they have is a huge edge in conference record over every contender in the conference. And that's why they're 7-1 right now in the conference. So right now, the Patriots are the overall number 1 seed. Okay. And they're 7-1 in conference. No other team in the AFC has less than 3 losses. So the Patriots are totally in control in that regard. But I think the one other thing that the way this schedule falls is so good for New England, because this week, the only team that really has a chance against them in the AFC East, Buffalo, has got their toughest game down the stretch. Buffalo at Tampa Bay, where New England will be home on its couches watching the game. And their bye at the beginning of the year, they say, man, late bye, that's not great. But in recent years, late buys have really corresponded to helping teams when they get ready to go in the playoffs. One other thing I would say, the Bills chafed at it after the game. And I don't know if I was a little nerdy after the game, but I stayed up and I watched the press conferences after the game. And they had the Bills players, you could tell, were chafing at the sort of public impression that they were weak against the run in this game, because the statistics say 46 for 222, 4.8 a carry. That's horrible. And their point was, hey, one long run. But if you take away the one long run, they still gave up 45 carries for 3.5 a carry. And every time they knew it was coming. So what I would say for them scoffing that the Patriots didn't control this game on the ground. And I mean, they didn't chew them up and spit them out. I get it. But the Patriots exerted their will physically on the Buffalo Bills, I thought, even though a lot of times it wasn't pretty. Those are my takeaways. Give me yours.
Come back to that word you just mentioned, Peter, physically. And they won with physicality. And I'm a numbers guy. I think a lot of times numbers tell a wonderful story. This time it was an eye test. And the Buffalo players and coaches can say whatever they would like, that they could wrap this up however they want and justify that loss in their own minds. But there came a point early where everybody in the stadium knew New England was just going to run the ball and that's it. They didn't pass once in the second and third quarter. I looked one time, Peter, I think they had 41 runs and one pass. So no matter what the numbers say, they got beat by a team that basically raised its hand halfway through the first quarter and said, just so everybody knows, all we're going to do is run the football tonight. They still couldn't beat them. 4 point whatever yards per carry, whatever. Those first couple series in the second half, after they had the halftime to get together and talk about it, they picked up first down after first down, a couple of those drives. So that was, to me, kind of a demoralizing loss, because in any sport where there's physicality involved and you are clearly the more physical team over a main rival, that's not your ordinary win. That's one that sticks around for a while.
Paul, I want to talk a little bit today in the podcast this week about the ridiculous parity that we're seeing in the NFL right now. And I'll give people a little clue about my very near future. Okay. I am going to cover the Cincinnati-San Francisco game this week in Cincinnati. And everybody would say, well, geez, why aren't there better games this weekend? There probably are better matchups this weekend. I'll tell you why I'm covering this game. Because the Bengals and the 49ers are both perfect illustrations of what the NFL is this year. Look what the Bengals were for 2 weeks or 3 weeks before they played the Chargers on Sunday. They were a no doubt playoff team. And you watch them and you say, these guys are going to be a tough out for somebody in January. This is going to be a tough game for somebody. And then before you even look up, on Sunday at home, they're down 24-0 to the Chargers. And on the other hand, the 49ers, they come out, they win 3 in a row. They look fantastic. And then they go to Seattle and they get beat by a team that had been horrible, for most of the year. So, but that's what this league is this year. Okay. Just like, you can't figure out what's going to happen. I'm not going to throw these teams away because they had one game where they didn't play that well. And Paul, the other part of it is If you look at the playoff standings right now, San Francisco is the 7th seed in the NFC right now at 6-6. Cincinnati is the 7th seed in the AFC at 7-5. So up, down, in, out, whatever, both of these teams have their fate in their hands. And so I want to ask you about why you believe, or what you think is the reason for all of these teams being so close this year versus, say, past years, when by approaching the middle of December, we are getting a lot of space and a lot of gaps between the teams. Not so this year.
Like so many fans, just like you, Peter, I've sat and thought about this one quite a bit as the season has gone along, because it's clear this is a major part of the league this year. And those two teams you're covering this weekend, the Bengals and the 49ers, perfect snapshots of what's going on. It's like, how many times this year have we said, okay, the 49ers, the Bengals, they're this. And then 3 weeks later, there's something different. Then a week later, there's something different. And there are so many teams like that. I think that this addition of one more regular season game, the addition of an extra playoff team, somewhere in there, the mindset, the sense of urgency, the way teams feel about sprinting in the middle to the end of the regular season has changed. It's almost accepted. And I don't know if you or I could get any of the coaches or players to admit this, but I think that their feeling about this now longer regular season has changed. And kind of like the end of an NBA game or a big chunk of NBA games toward the end of the season, it's I don't want to say okay, but it's reality that teams are going to have a bad stretch. And I feel like they've accepted that. Players are more likely to sit out with a little injury. Teams are more likely to accept the fact that we've had a stretch of quarters or a couple games that haven't gone our way, but we can piece it back together by the end of the season. I'm working on being more clear with the details of verbalizing that, but that's kind of my general thought, that I do feel like the makeup of the team's mentality has changed a little bit with another game, with another team in the playoffs. It feels different in the middle to the back third of the regular season.
You know, I'm going to give you one other little pet theory of mine, okay? And that is, I think some of the coaches, particularly some of the younger coaches this year, are coaching a little bit differently. I wrote about it in my column on Monday, Football Morning in America. And I wrote about Brandon Staley of the Los Angeles Chargers, who is taking 4th down right now and being uber aggressive on 4th down. And I list all the reasons why. But one of the things that he said to me during the course of our exchange about it is that, look, you know, I'm going to read his quote. What I've learned and come to accept and embrace is, I don't care how we lose. I don't care about the optics of it. But being conservative just preserves stats and lets you feel that you're closer than you really are. You know, if we lose because of play calls I made that are grounded in study and in facts, I'm fine with that. And because more and more teams are doing that, in my opinion, you're almost saying that, okay, Los Angeles Chargers, let's predict how you're going to do. But it's hard to predict how they're going to do, because they're going to play the game a little bit different than teams have played traditionally. What's the difference you're saying? A lot of times they're adding 4th down to their equation instead of punting anytime you're in minus territory, your own territory, and it's 4th down. They don't always do that. I had an illustration of, you know, earlier in this year when on 4th and 2 from their own 28-yard line in a game they were down by 2 touchdowns in the first half, he went for it. I remember that week thinking, okay, it's now gone insane. This girl's gone wild. You know, I mean, It's just absolutely crazy. But his explanation is very good. And I guess that I would say, I look at a lot of these coaches right now and how they're coaching, starting with Doug Peterson a few years ago in Philadelphia. But you've got him, you've got Zach Taylor, you've definitely got Frank Reich, who's a big disciple of it. You got Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland. You've got a lot of coaches where their team is going to be a little bit different anyway, because you're not positive how they're going to be playing. I don't know. That's one theory I've got.
And with all of that, Peter, thinking about how much parity there is in the league right now, I will say, after thinking about this quite a bit the last 24 hours, pick out your favorite 2 or 3 teams in either conference. I do think there is a big difference between the top 2 or 3 and the next 10 that have a chance of getting in. So the decent teams, there are a bunch of those. There's more to the pretty good middle teams than we've ever seen. But if you do this exercise at home, pick your favorite couple. There is a pretty good difference between the very best teams and then the double-digit number of teams in either conference chasing a playoff spot.
Paul, will end with a question that's on the minds of a lot of football fans, and I think a lot of people in the organization in Tampa. Should the Bucs cut Antonio Brown for misleading them on his vaccination status? A year ago, as I wrote this week, Bruce Arians told me basically one mistake and he's gone. And as I wrote this week, it isn't just one mistake. It's using a fake vaccination card, choosing to be around the team with all of the health issues with Bruce Arians, who's a cancer survivor, Tom Moore, the offensive assistant who's around Antonio Brown a lot. He's 82 years old. And you sort of look at all this and you say, you know, he's done more than one thing wrong. But, you know, Paul, as you well know, a lot of times in football, you know, the guy who is a really, really good player is going to get more chances than the guy who's on the practice squad. What's your thought about what the Bucs should do right now?
Well, it feels like you could certainly lean on the fact that he's received a, you know, fairly significant punishment. I mean, he's out for 3 games. It's not like he got suspended for a half or 1 game. So 3 games, I mean, you feel that. And I also believe it's without pay. Now, here's where the personal feelings come in. I would like to see him released. I mean, I am on the side, like I'm tired of all this, and I would like to see the players vaccinated. And it wouldn't bother me one bit if they decided after this 3-week suspension or at any point during it, they said, you know what, considering that you came in with a couple of strikes, considering where we're trying to go with this policy and where we want the players in the league to end up soon with all of this in this policy, we're going to let you go. I would support that. It doesn't feel like they're going there. I think that they're going to stop at the 3 games and say he's served his time, he's done his punishment. But the way I feel about this entire issue certainly bleeds in here that I would support it if they let him go.
I totally agree with you. I think it's a very slippery slope, especially because 17-week regular season, even though they do have good depth at the receiver position. If you watching this past weekend, you saw Chris Godwin limp off at one point. And look, you know, it is a tough job being a receiver in the NFL, and making it through a season unscathed is very, very hard. I just have a feeling at the end of the day, that's going to win the day for Tampa. But again, we'll see. I think it's fascinating how the specter of the real world has really come into the NFL in so many ways. And this year, seriously, it could really impact who wins the Super Bowl. If Antonio Brown is not on this team, that is going to have an impact on who wins this Super Bowl. I don't care what anybody says. So be very, very interesting to watch down the stretch.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.